I was born in Cali, Colombia, July 20th, 1971. Moved here when I was about 3 or 4. Pretty much had, I guess like everyone else, a standard upbringing. Grew up in the Ninth Ward in New Orleans till about 1980. Moved to Chalmette. Then around 89, moved to Araby. Attended Holy Cross High School. Then moved out here to Metairie in 94. And that's pretty much about it. Started playing guitar when I was about 14 or 15. So, a lot of people don't know I have a guitar background. That was my first stringed instrument. My instrument before that was I was a clarinet player from 5th grade to 9th grade. I took up the guitar, and then somewhere around 2000, got sick of the guitar, picked up bass, and haven't looked back, although I still mess around with the guitar. I can still compose on it and write on it. And my introduction to the scene was May of 89, which was Storyville Jazz Hall, I Hate God, Soylent Green, and Exhorder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was my first show. Hell of a way to get introduced. So that was my very first show, and then it went from there.
Yeah. Pause for a second. Can you clip it like here so it doesn't rub on you?
Clip it where?
Just like, let's say like right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no piece of it rubs on your chin.
Yeah.
I'll just piece all this stuff together. It's cool. Yeah. They are sensitive.
Oh, wait, I don't think I'm doing the tree.
The clip part, let's see. This part is the clip.
Oh, that's
the other piece is what's keeping it on the neck of the mic. Perfect. That'd be cool. All right. So, did you take music theory with the clarinet?
Yes. Learning the clarinet, especially at 10 years old, that's how I developed the ability to sight read, learn theory, scales, arpeggios. Because I find that a lot of musicians, guitarists and bassists, always ask me, dude, I'd love to learn music theory, or do you teach music theory? And I'm like, yeah, to me, theory's, it's second nature. It's easy for me, but only because I have that clarinet background.
Sure.
So you have to learn how to read treble clef. You have to learn how to read music, whereas with guitar, you have tablature, ditto for bass. You have tablature where it shows the numbers, where you put your fingers on the frets, what frets to play. You don't have that for a clarinet.
Yeah.
So, you have to sight read. And it's also, too, anything I write, I could also, if I wanted to, I could just put it down in standard notation as music. If someone ever wanted to see sheet music of it.
Big help.
yeah, most definitely, So, yeah, that you're correct. That is where it started, was with my exposure to clarinet and playing in the marching band.
Yeah. At home, mom and dad are both at home growing up as a child?
No, just my mom. My mom split from my dad real young, then we moved here from Cali, and she raised me. And, interestingly enough, my dad speaks mostly Spanish, which, though growing up in my household, my mom, although she's fluent, she never spoke it with me, and I didn't really get any exposure to Spanish till my freshman year at Holy Cross, where you had to take Spanish. My freshman and sophomore year, Spanish 1, Spanish 2.
Yeah.
But I never wound up using it. It only came into, I wouldn't say I'm very proficient at it. I can speak it if need be, although at times I understand it better than I can speak it.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, but I had to do it for certain jobs. Like at one point I was selling car insurance for U.S. agencies, and a lot of people I were writing were undocumented. A lot of, I guess, people coming in from Central America and whatnot. So I had to learn to kind of speak Spanish with them.
Sure.
But also, too, on the weekends, I do this thing every now and then. It's called The Dinner Detective. It's like a murder mystery thing, and I'm part of the cast, and I play one of the murder victims. And the staff at the hotel, they all speak Spanish. So talking to them, it helped improve my Spanish.
Nice.
So when I see them, I can talk fluent Spanish with them and ask them things and whatnot. Yeah. But honestly, around here on the scene, it really doesn't come up.
Did were there any Latin influences? Because I was gonna I was gonna ask about the music in your household as a child, because a lot of times, I mean, it's a major influence. Whatever our parents listen to, you know.
My mom listened to, she listened to the radio a lot, WTIX, oldies. So as a result, I grew up, listening when we were in the car, listening to the 70s stuff, the 60s, hearing all that on WTIX. My dad, by contrast, he had wound up leaving Cali to go to Florida and remarried. And so when I'd go visit him in Florida, it would be a total 180. He would have, like Latin jazz or brass music, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass.
Sure.
So I got exposed to that at a really young age, and I kind of dug it. It didn't really stick with me, but it was definitely different. And I mean, he was into the whole that side of that style of music. So and into the dance styles as well, bolero, cha-cha, salsa, merengue.
Yeah.
So complete 180.
Did that? I mean, because at the time you were playing clarinet, did it kind of resonate with you that listening to the woodwind sides and the brass side of things?
At that time, no.
No,
it didn't. Actually, my visiting my dad down in Florida, that actually came way after I was done with clarinet. I was already in my early 20s by that time. Yeah, so clarinet was long been done. Having said that, last couple years, I really contemplated. I started pricing clarinets and maybe picking one up again, just to do one of those little marching band crews that you see, like Crew of Whatever, like a little ragtag crew that just march through the quarter during one play and play, Dixieland or ragtime. And I'm thinking, man, I'd love me just pick up the clarinet again. I can still play it. A quick but funny story at Guitar Center. This was some years ago. They were selling clarinets. And I knew the girl who was a friend of mine. She was working the front door. Anyway, I was checking out one of the clarinets, and she let me use a reed. I was playing it, and I started playing Iron Man. I started playing some Black Sabbath and Judas Priest on the clarinet because I know the notes, and wound up actually selling a clarinet to this guy and his kid. And they was like, yeah, sure. And they bought the clarinet from the guy, and I was like, I just sold a clarinet and I don't even work here. Right. I just thought it was amusing. Like, hey, can I get a cut of this? Like, I just sold an instrument for you. Yeah. I mean, but I played Iron Man and I played Breaking the Law. And like, she's like, is that Judas Priest? I'm like, yeah. I mean, I know the notes. Yeah. So I can see it on clarinet. I can visualize it and I can play it.
That's funny.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst for the change, the switch between guitar and bass?
I think I'd always kind of been a closet bassist because I always paid attention to bass players. But really what did it for me was watching their fingers. Case in point, Steve Harris, Iron Maiden. I'd watch him and I'd just see like their fingers. I was like, how do they play like that with their fingers? Like, God, I can't fathom that. And I think that was always fascinating to me. And around 2000, like I said, when I switched over, I was at a friend's house. Who at the time he lived in the Marigny and he had a bass. And every time I'd go over there, I'd pick it up and I would just noodle on it. And he was like, "Man, just take the damn thing home," And it went from there. And I went with that, and then got my first bass, which was a Yamaha RBX80 black fretless bass. And I got the fretless not because of. A lot of people think Jaco, although Jaco Pastorius is one of my biggest influences. Yeah. But I got it because of Steve DiGiorgio, the bass player for Sadus and Death, who now plays with Testament. He was like the first metal guy to play fretless, to use fretless in an extreme metal context. Really? And that was the reason I got the fretless, because hearing him play, I was like, oh my God, he's playing this extreme thrash stuff on a fretless. And so that was a catalyst behind me getting into fretless bass, which I played for... I think the first decade or so I was strictly fretless before going to fretted. But going to fretted was not necessarily a choice. It kind of happened by accident. And I do have a fretless, the one you heard me playing on earlier, the J copy I have over there. You heard me noodling around on. Because the fretless is just, it's a part of me. You can just get a sound out of it. It has a nuance that you just can't get out of a fretted. Sure. Although some of the techniques I do on fretless, like sliding the harmonics or sliding chords, I can do it on the fretted, just because the fretted bass is a fretted bass. You're not going to have much to work with because the frets will kill if you try to slide a harmonic. the fret metal, of course, is going to kill once you get past a certain point.
Sure.
You know.
Do you think your friend loaning you that, did he loan it to you or give it to you?
Oh, he loaned it to me.
Okay. So he loaned you that bass and you have it for some time. Do you think that kind of gave you the confidence? Because it requires a sort of confidence to attack the bass fretless at first, it would seem. Do you know what I'm saying? So
yes.
Did it kind of give you the confidence to make that decision?
It did. It did, because any fretless bass I've ever had, they've all had the lines on them. Because some of them don't have lines necks at all. It's just a flat, bald fingerboard. But all the basses I've had the lines on them. And when I borrowed his bass, first it was a matter of getting the right hand technique down, because to switch from pick to fingers the first month or two, it was grueling, because my fingers just didn't want to conform to doing alternate picking. It just would not work. And so after a couple months it started getting easier. And then I got the Yamaha, I don't remember where I got it from, and started going to open mic nights at like the Turtle Lounge out on Airline. It would have these open mic blues jams. So I'd go there with my fretless, and you know, I mean, that's how you do it. You just, you know, kind of like jumping in with both feet, so to speak. You
Sure.
know, bringing the fretless to a blue and just getting your chops together there, playing with people.
Yeah.
You know?
Which one was with you for most of your callus building phase, I guess you would call it?
I had wound up getting, after the Yamaha, I wound up getting this jazz copy bass called an XX. And it was a copy of a Fender Jazz bass, 20 frets. It was fretless, but with a line neck. But I put EMG pickups in it, EMG jazz replacement pickups, and that was the one that stayed with me through Katrina, through everything, and that's what I built my chops up on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that and lucking out finding a couple Jaco Pastorius books and really analyzing and learning what he played and how he did it, and that built my chops up as well.
Yeah, I bet. I didn't know they had books out on that guy, but
Yeah.
I heard his music and it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I have a couple of his books with a lot of his transcriptions, and it's not. I mean, it's easy for me now, but in the beginning, no, it was work.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of gigging just kind of on solo, like just going out and going to open mics and things like that, and performances. And you said you were at a blues night. Do you kind of gravitate towards certain genres?
Not so much I gravitate as much as that's really kind of all what they had going on in Jefferson and New Orleans. You know,
fit.
Yeah, exactly. Like back when I was playing guitar before I picked up bass, I would go to open mic blues jams at Mid-City Rockin' Bowl before it was on Carrollton. No, I'm sorry, it was still on Carrollton, but it was where the Shamrock is now.
Yeah.
Before they moved next to the old College Inn. And they would have open mic nights there, and I'd go with a bass player friend of mine. At the time, I was playing a Strat, which I still, well, not the same Strat, but and I would go there and I'd play and play. So that's really all I had were open mic jams. They were mainly blues jams.
Yeah.
Because that's what everyone. They really didn't have much. And we have like open mic jazz night, or if they did have an open mic, to be like, bring your instrument, play whatever. But what I noticed was that when sometimes I would go just to scope them out and not bring my instrument, just to see what people would play, and the majority of the time, you know, guys would come with their guitar, their bass, or their horn, or whatever, and they would wind up playing just really common blues progressions, you know, just standard stuff. And I was like, okay, I get it, you know. So that's so that was about. So not necessarily much gravitating as much as that's all what they really had. Having said that, though, I like playing blues jams because I get to walk. What I mean by walk is walking bass lines like do 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 do.
Sure.
Which people who know the kind of stuff I do might think that I maybe like that style, whatever. But
Right.
nah, I love that style. I mean, that's the basis of all things. Blue. That's the basis of rock and roll and everything that follows. You know, I mean, if you're a bassist and you can't walk bass lines or play behind a guitar or play over chord changes, you know, don't bother, because that's what the bass does. You know, it's there. with the drums, the rhythm section, and you're doing your thing. Even some of the mimic stuff has a couple lines where I walk. And like I said, walk's just it's just a slang term for moving the bass lines around. Do 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 do. So
yeah. You were, I think you said it already, I might have missed it, playing bass by the time you were visiting your father, or was it still guitar?
It was still guitar.
It was still guitar.
It was still guitar at the time.
Had there been any other Latin influences in the music that you were hearing before then? I mean, it came to you in a strong way at that time, but I mean, before then, were you hearing much Latin influence around you, or in what you were playing either?
No, not at all. When I was playing guitar, I was going Holy Cross at the time, and I was hanging out with a couple guys where I was living in Village Square, and like me, they were total metalheads. So, for us, it was all about Priest and Maiden and Motley Crue, and so no, there was no Latin to be found at all. Right. It was strictly a metal thing. Did
you take anything with you from that encounter in Florida?
No.
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 Plainly said. Everybody's got a Herb Albert Tijuana Brass Band record somewhere. They're in every bin. They're in everyone's house. They just made it out to the four corners of the earth some kind of a way. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of it stuck with you.
A couple of the tunes did. I don't know the names of songs, but if I heard them, and if I heard the trumpet melody, I would know what it is. It would instantly take me back.
Sure.
To being young, and I'd be like, "Oh man, I remember that song." Yeah, that's because my dad was into that kind of music. So
the lady's name escapes me, but she's a volunteer DJ on WWOZ, Hispanic lady, and she plays nothing but Spanish music for her time on the show, and I jam out to it, dude. I like it. I love that stuff. I think it's so cool. It's different than whatever you're gonna find. I mean, maybe in other parts of the United States that's more prevalent, but here, that's my go-to for that. So I mean, and it's definitely, it's different than anything else we're gonna be able to find. So it kind of, I don't know, it strikes me. I'll pause for a minute and I'll listen to a few tunes on there every time I hear it.
Yeah, it's well, for a while I was working with a fringe Latin band. They were called Vivaz. Later, Acoustic Swiftness. They later changed their name to Vivaz. And they still play around the city, and they would play a lot at the time. It was called Cafe Brazil on Frenchman.
Yeah.
And I would work the door for them, and just being around them and hanging out with the band leader, who I've known for years. I mean, that's all he had playing was Latin jazz and things like that. So, going and doing, helping them out at gigs, working the door, setting their gear up. I was constantly exposed to that. That's all they played.
That's cool.
So that's where a lot of the bulk of the Latin stuff came in, was hearing that stuff, the different styles, especially the salsa. And the percussion and everything. I'm like, man. And those bass lines too, man. They really, they're not the most difficult things, but I mean, it just really propels the music.
Sure.
In conjunction with the drums. It really pushes it. That kind of style, that's called a clave.
Yeah.
And it has 2 against 3 and 3 against 2, and it's a rhythmic type of form. And it really propels the music along with the drums and drives it. And being a bassist, of course, that always stuck with me. Like, man, it's just, a simple progression, but it's
powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
That's cool. What was when in your life did the first band occur? Is that something that's been recent? Has most of your experience been solo?
My first band was a band called, this was 2008 or 9, was a band called Vice, which were a few friends of mine. My friend Matt, he was a drummer, and he's like, hey, I'm doing this project. I want you in on it. And so that was my first band. Immediately after that, or right around the same time, I got with this band called Built to Destroy, which was a real total 180. Vice was like, well, kind of like alternative rock. Mm-hmm. Built to Destroy was just straight up heavy technical thrash. And so I got with them, doing stuff with them. And then right around the same time, maybe a year too late, I joined the band called, at the time, called The Great Void. Then they just went to The Void. I played bass with them. And so that was about, 2000, between 2008 and I'd say 2010. And then sometime around 2000, why did I get confused between 2010 and 2011? I think 2011, somewhere around that time, I got the Exhorder gig, which was, what had happened was the bass player at the time, Frankie Sparcello, had passed. And I got a Facebook message from Kyle Thomas, and he's like, call Vinny Labella ASAP. And it just went from there. But I think the way I got the gig, I'm convinced, was that the band Malevolent Creation from Florida, they were playing a show at a venue in Fat City at the time called The Bar, which used to be Ski Lodge.
Yeah. And
the promoter hit me up and was like, hey, dude, we need an opening band. Can you guys do it? Built to Destroy. And so I hit up my guys. I'm like, dude, we're opening for Malevolent. Let's do it. So we did it, and Kyle and Vinny were there. And because Malevolent was on Roadrunner Records, as was Exhorder.
Yeah.
And they saw us play, and I think that was a catalyst. They were like, so I contacted Vinny. He's like, look, I know you have a couple show coming up, because The Void and Built to Destroy, I was going to be doing double duty. We were booked to play Siberia that night, and I told the guys, I said, look, Exhorder want me to do some shows with them in Texas with Rigor Mortis. So I'm taking the gig, and they weren't too crazy about it, but they understood. And then after we did a few shows there, then a month or two later, we did the Maryland Death Fest, where we co-headlined with Voivod, which was kind of a dream come true, and to get to hang out with those guys. And then after that, I've pretty much just been low-key for the most part, with the exception of now I'm doing, for the last few months, I guess we started it around November or so, I've been doing the Mimic project with Apollo from Heracleon.
Mm-hmm.
So
you were, but you were also, you started the Grooves, didn't you? That was your band?
The Grooks, no. And thank you. I can't believe I forgot to mention. Shame on me. I actually volunteered to play bass for them, because the first time I saw them was at the Circle Bar, and they completely blew me away. They were so energetic. I was like, man, these guys are fantastic. And their drummer had left, and their bass player went to drums, and so they were just a two-piece. And I saw them play at Babylon one night, this club in Metairie, and I said, man, you guys really need a bass player. I said, I'm not doing anything. I'd be more than happy to. And they're like, okay, well, we're playing Creepy Fest next week. Can you learn the tunes in a week? I was like, yeah, just give me, a tape or some a way to listen to them. And they sent me the files. I learned the tunes, and yeah, we did Creepy Fest, and then started playing shows with other local bands, and playing Creepy Fest every year. And so yeah, no, it wasn't my band. I volunteered to play bass for them because I liked what they did. They were real energetic, and that's another thing too. I kind of pride myself on, is that any band or project I've ever done has not sounded like anything remotely that's come out of New Orleans. I'm not saying that to disparage the New Orleans sound.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is bands like Built to Destroy, The Void, Vice, The Grooks, Mimic, my current project, none of those bands sounded anything like what was coming out the city. They all had their own unique sound. All the bands were different. And I pride myself on that, because it's hard, really, I think, to be in bands that can stand out and not be carbon copies of other bands. Because when a sound becomes real popular, naturally you want to copy that. For every band that comes out that breaks new ground, you have a bunch of other bands that follow, like, hey, it worked for them, let's do that. Whereas all the bands I've been in had been like, no, we're not following formula, we're not following tradition, we're doing our own thing. And sometimes I think that unfortunately it can work against you, because with some people it can either go over their heads, or it's just not their thing and it falls by the wayside. Yeah. But I mean, to me, it's better than just playing in a band that's a clone of something else.
Yeah, you got to realize too. There's a lot of artists out there that they get comfortable. No matter what they did to get to where they are, they start to get comfortable, and the exploration part just kind of fades a little bit. You know, they start looking for what's worked already to get that next solid.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And I can name so many bands. You know, like I was having a conversation about this with a friend of mine some time ago. You know, it's like I love Suffocation, a death metal band from New York, but I don't want to listen to 10 different bands that sound like them. You know, I love the Dillinger Escape Plan. I don't want to listen to a bunch of bands that sound like them. You know, I love Cynic. I don't want to hear a bunch of bands that are trying to copy them. Not that there are many. You know, so it's like I always want to listen to the genre front runners.
Sure.
You know, and not the clones, because all the clones are going to do is just take that and only get a surface glimpse, if you will, or just the most not extraneous. What's the word I'm looking for? Just the most basic surface thing, and they're just going to go with that. They don't really go much further than that, and especially in the death metal field, when you got a lot of bands that do the Cookie Monster vocals or suck the mids out of the guitar and just do
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's all been done so many times before and by better bands. So my thing is, you know, I'm listening to the bands that started that, you know, that were the front runners for that, you know, especially a lot of the Florida bands.
Sure.
So
What came first for you? Were you listening to those things because of those qualities, or were you trying to do that on your own first, or did it kind of happen simultaneously? I mean, and honestly, how do you do both at the same time? Like, it's hard not to find yourself, even by accident, starting to sound like, or having some influence sink into what you're doing, you know, and then you realize, wait a minute, so that's already been done.
well, it kind of followed. It's interesting because when I first got into metal, this was around '84. For me, it was Priest, Maiden, Motley Crue, Metallica, you know, Ozzy, Dokken, Dio, and which was at the time, you know, was current. It was still fresh. It was cutting edge. You know, then a few years later, when thrash started rearing its ugly head, or a couple years later, then I started hearing thrash and hearing like, oh man, listen to how fast these bands can play. And
Yeah.
and then a few years later, when death metal started coming in, I guess what I'm trying to say is I've always been fascinated by extremes. Like, how fast can you humanly play? How long can you play that fast for? You know, that's always been a thing with me. Like, I can remember hearing Slayer and Creator. I heard Slayer first, Rain and Blood, around '86 or so. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, Jesus, man, I thought, you know, Judas Priest and Accept or Metallica were fast. And I heard Rain and Blood, and then a while later I heard Creator's Pleasure to Kill. And then a few years later, when I'd heard, like, you know, Death and Morbid Angel and stuff like that, I'm like, my God, just keeps getting so extreme. And I loved it. I'm like, this is great. These guys are pushing themselves, like, to the limits. Like, man, what, you know, let's push it and push it. And I've always been fascinated by that. Mm-hmm. And so pretty much whatever I would write or come up with is just a huge amalgamation of what I've been listening to for like the last almost 4 decades. I mean, you know, I still have LPs. I mean, you know, all these like, you know, which LPs for a lot of people's, although I know vinyl's made somewhat of a comeback.
Yeah.
You know, I've had a lot of these LPs since I was in high school. I mean, I got the first Slayer on vinyl. I got a bunch of Iron Maiden European B-sides. I got the early Megadeth on vinyl, like an Ozzy bootleg on vinyl, like all kinds of, you just, you know, you'd really have to search high and low for, like eBay or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but I bought this stuff when I had the chance to buy it in a record store called Vans Records in Chalmette, and before that it was Acorn Music, also in Chalmette, and it was the '80s, so they had everything.
Yeah.
You know, they had all that.
Yeah, I remember those days, man. They had warehouse records and tapes out here on Veterans in Metairie, and man, that you could go there and get any tape you could think of, and metal studded leather to boot, like, you know, it was like hanging on the walls, t-shirts, all that stuff. It was the world at the time.
It was, and not only was it like that here, well, Chalmette, I should say, where I was growing up, but there was also the Plaza Lake Forest. You had Camelot Records. I remember walking in there, and you name it, they had it. All by, Celtic Frost, Destruction, whatever. And I'm looking at all these album covers. I'm like, wow. I'm like, look at this. And and they had the shirts and everything. They had the mirrors. That was another thing too. Chalmette, they would have these fairs, and the prizes they give away depending on what event you did, like trying to pop balloons or whatever. I remember winning a Metallica Master of Puppets mirror and a Motley Crue Shout at the Devil mirror. What was it? Put my phone on. I don't know. Yeah, sorry about that. So,
you remember going to the fair? And
going to the fair, and I won a Motley Crue Master of Puppets mirror, and Metallica Master of Puppets mirror, and a Motley Crue Shout at the Devil mirror. I remember winning those, and I was like, I wish I still had them because they'd probably be worth money. I guess I was 15 or 16 at the time.
Yeah, and
I don't know what happened to them, but that was the era for it.
You were talking about your enthusiasm and following those that pushed the limits as far as what was humanly possible in metal. What about punk music and its influence on metal, or thrash even, and its influence? I mean, how do you what were your thoughts and encounters with it when you were just starting to see how far people could go?
My first exposure to punk rock, and therefore hardcore, was there's a station, it's still around, WTUL, Tulane station. Back in the mid-'80s, on Friday night they would have the hardcore show. On Saturday nights they would have the metal show, Generally Hostile. And at the time, Generally Hostile, the metal show on Saturday nights, they were playing everything that was coming out new at the time. So you would hear Fate's Warning, then you would hear Possessed, then you'd hear Celtic Frost, then you'd hear Slayer or Destruction, Megadeth, Hallows Eve. And this was all, and I'm listening, I'm like getting exposed to all this. And then on Friday nights, a hardcore show where they'd play Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, the Minutemen, Flipper, all this, Butthole Surfers. And it didn't really stick with me at the time. My real, I guess, going in with the punk rock thing was a friend of mine my senior year in high school. He bought me up for my birthday a Bad Brains, the first Bad Brains cassette, the one, the ROIR cassette, the yellow cassette. And I was like, oh my Lord, I was like, this is incredible. And then I think right after that, the Ramones followed. I bought a couple of their albums, and it just kind of went from there. Then it went to like Agnostic Front, and then it went to like Final Conflict, a band from California, then Cro-Mags. And then some years later, I happened to cross, even though they came out in '84, I didn't know who they were at the time, a band from Boston called Siege. And I got their cassette, Drop Dead. And that, to me, when I heard it, I was like, whoa. I was like, this was really extreme, more extreme than for because it was hardcore, but it was very extreme hardcore punk. And so Siege really blew me away with that, especially for the time it came out in '84. Since then, I've come to appreciate some of the later Black Flag stuff, like when Henry joined, like Process of Weeding Out, Slip It In, My War. I've come to really appreciate that. And if I do listen to any punk or hardcore, either it's going to be like Ramones, or it's going to be Bad Brains, or it's going to be Agnostic Front, things of that nature. And you're right, hardcore punk, without hardcore punk, you wouldn't have thrash.
Right. I guess that's kind of where I was leading up to. Obviously, you had a deep appreciation for it, watching it progress throughout the years. In what you were composing, how did it influence you? Or did it really?
It did, to an extent, especially in my formative years of learning guitar and trying to record stuff. The tempos did, and some of the chord progressions did. Like it definitely did to an extent. But mainly, especially during my time of playing guitar, what really I honed in on were the shredders, quote unquote, because at the time you had Shrapnel Records, and they had Paul Gilbert, Jason Becker, Tony McAlpine. They had all the up and coming the shredders. Yngwie, to an extent, he wasn't on Shrapnel, but he was a name. Some years later, a few years later, I'd heard Steve Vai. And so that had really made a big impression on me. So then I set out to try and learn how to play like that, like the arpeggios and the sweep arpeggios and the fast scales. And I got fairly proficient with it. And then just some years later, I guess I got bored, kind of burned out of it, and then I went to the bass. Which I can do that stuff on bass, but there's something about playing bass that I find to be very sublime and just very satisfying, mainly because playing the bass, you have a lot more control over the music than most people think you would. What I mean by that is, if the guitar is playing a certain rhythmic figure, the bass can play something along with it. But I'll give you a real life example. When I played in The Void, we had a song where the guitars were holding out chords like da da, and underneath it you had the kicks going do 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 do. So I would play an eighth note bass line to it, like a do 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 to propel it. But when the guitarist was switching the chords, I would stay on the same note I was playing. And what's interesting is that all the other bass players who played in The Void after me, they never played it like I played it. They switched the root note with the guitars. Whereas, let's say the chord the guitarist was playing was E, I would play E, but then say they went to C or C sharp, I would stay on E. What that does is it creates tension against the chord until you finally decide to resolve it. So after they played, they went through like 4 chord changes. Then when they'd launch into the main riff, I would join them back on the main riff.
Gotcha.
And that's actually that's a Paul McCartney technique.
Oh shit.
Yeah, he even said that in interviews, like the bass you can control, where the song goes, you can control the key. And even though I wasn't necessarily thinking Paul McCartney when I played that part, that I found out after the fact, he does the same thing. And also rhythmic variations as well. So, if the guitar is holding out a chord for 4 beats or playing a note for 4 beats, I can do that, or I can play 8 eighth notes, or I can play 2 half notes. I mean, it's almost infinite, the rhythmic possibilities with the bass in conjunction with the drums that you can do that can give life to a song.
Sure. Playing guitar, whether it was playing guitar or playing bass, at the time, was it kind of causing you to dissect the songs that you would hear, dissect that instrument's part in those songs down to what they were doing technically?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, if you talk to a bassist or a guitarist or anybody, the instrument they play, they feel like it's the most pronounced part of the song that they hear. Not that it stands out for everyone, but it stands out for them, and they more take notice of that instrument's parts in that song, I guess, because of its relevance, and their ears are kind of tuned to that already, But you seem to kind of cozy up to the technical aspects of the instrument, so that's why I asked, when you were, let's just pick bass, by the time you were playing bass, were you hearing these songs in a different way, or would you listen to it with the ear of a fan and then listen to it with the ear of a bassist?
In the beginning, it was with the ear of a fan, although being a musician, the bass parts would, I'd take notice of them, although not as much as the song overall. When I became a bassist, then I went back and re-listened and really analyzed, and I was like, oh, there is quite a bit going on here. Mainly the 2 bands in general like that I did that with were Atheist and Rush, because I was a fan, or I listened to the songs, digging on the songs, being aware of the musicianship. But once I got with the bass, and I went back and listened to that and really started dissecting it, especially the bass lines played by the bass players for the respective bands.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. I was like, okay, there's more going on here than what I originally thought was. And so it was a matter of dissecting and saying to myself, why does, say, Geddy Lee play this particular run of notes or this line against what Alex Lifeson is playing on the guitar? You know, or why an Atheist, why is Tony Choi playing, you know, why is he choosing these notes or playing this type of figure against what Randy or Kelly were playing on the guitar? Why is he doing this? And so as a result, analyzing that and breaking it down, it definitely had an influence on me to realize that, yeah, there'll be times a lot where I will go with the guitar because you want to lock in, but then there are times you don't just want to follow the guitar all the way through.
Sure.
You know, you want to break off, do your own thing, do something different, but at the same time, not ruining the song. I'll give you an example. Queen song, You're My Best Friend.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I listened to that song as a fan for years. I used to hear it on the radio growing up in the car. You know, it's talking about with my mom, you know, in the 70s. And then when I started playing, get into bass, listening to John Deacon, the bassist, listening to his bass lines, I was like, whoa. I was like, all right, this dude's he's just not playing root 5 octave. He's not just winging it. Like the song You're My Best Friend, to me, is a good example, because if you listen to that song, the bass is doing anything but just playing root notes. He's all over the place. He's doing triplets. He's walking bass lines. It's a very busy bass line. However, when you hear the song, you don't say to yourself, wow, listen to that bass line. You don't. You're like, man, It's a really great song. It's a great melody. And to me, that is like someone I would call a bass master, where you can make the line busy, you can make it move, but at the same time, it doesn't detract from the overall structure of the song, and it doesn't stomp all over the other instruments. It's there, but it doesn't stand out so much that at the expense of the other instruments. And that's a good example of that. To me, I would dare say that to me, that is a lot harder than doing two-hand tapping or arpeggios or fast scales. I mean, because that's technique, that's muscle memory, that's, you know, things you can learn, you know, like exercises. But to play to lay down a bass line that supports the song, you know, that can move around, that can be busy, but at the same time not so much that it's distracting. I mean, to me, putting the right note in the right place, the right time, that to me is much, much harder than doing a lot of fast, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess as far as who would I pick for that style of playing, for me it would be like Paul McCartney, John Entwistle, John Paul Jones, John Deacon, Queen. Another guy, he's lesser known, but to me he's up there with those guys, is Stephen McDonald, who's the bass player for Red Cross and also the bassist for the Melvins as well. He's from that school, that real tasteful bass playing, like every note's where it should be. He plays octaves where they're needed. He doesn't play anything that doesn't need to be there. Everything is placed perfectly and it serves the song. Sure.
I think you put it well earlier when you called it sublime, whereas it's understated, but it's still a driving force.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
and
totally.
that definitely takes taste more so than methodology, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it does. You know, I mean, again, you know, but even then, the bass players who are like really technical, or I'll give you an example, Billy Sheehan. You know, he's known for doing his two-handed tap and his insane bass theatrics. But, you know, I saw him with the Winery Dogs recently at House of Blues, and if you listen to his playing with David Lee Roth, man, he's a solid, you know, he comes from the clubs, playing in Buffalo, New York. He, you know, playing straight ahead, straight bass lines, you know, he can do that.
Yeah.
You know, he's one of those guys, he can sit there and listen to the David Lee Roth album, Eat 'Em and Smile. They have a song on there, I'm Easy, and he's just do. And he's walking, you know, just a standard bass line, but he can do that because he learned to walk or crawl before he ran.
Sure.
So I mean, he can do that. Same with me. People like, they see my Instagram videos and they're like, oh, look at this, like, wow. And it's like, it's cool and all, but I'm having just as much fun, playing a blues line or jazz line at an open mic somewhere, just kicking back and not having to worry about being at the forefront of, hey, watch what I can do. It's like, no, man, it's like I just want to kick back, hang with the drummer, and support everyone else,
I'm a fan of an era of jazz, I guess, in the 70s when there was a little bit of funk involved. I mean, I'm sure there's better people to describe it than me, but it's about early to mid 70s jazz, like let's say the Jazz Crusaders or something, But I was always a fan of the idea that the guys could get together and they'll all start off playing a song, and it's going to go through its own progression where they're not going to give it to you all at once. They're going to kind of build up to the best part, But in the midst of all of that, they'll pause, and each guy gets his solo. It's just so cool to me, you know what I mean? And then they all fall back in line supporting each other to complete the journey, And I always thought that was like giving people their flowers. You get your moment, but you know when to reel it back in and let the drummer have his moment, or the guitarist have his moment. I just always thought that was, I don't know, gentlemanly or something. Just a mad respect.
Well, it's a matter. I'd say it's just coming from you're talking about the '70s stuff. It's just coming from the old bebop school, the era of jazz, where the trumpet player had his part, then let the drummer do it, let the bass do it. Yeah, and that's that is cool because each person gets their little spot. And for me, I guess the jazz thing hit me around 16, 17 years old. My first exposure to it was the British guitarist Alan Holdsworth, who still to this day is my favorite guitar player. And then from there it went to Steve Morrison and Dixie Dregs, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Tribal Tech, Chick Corea, and listening to the stuff in the 70s, it blew me, from the 70s. I liked it because it was quote-unquote fusion. It was jazz rock. There were jazz players, but they had the intensity of a rock band. Same with Weather Report for Jaco Pastorius. They didn't have a guitar player, but the dynamics they used, they were very energetic, and they were almost like a rock band in some sense. Yeah. And if you listen, I don't know if they're people watching this are fans of Mahavishnu Orchestra, but for me, if you listen to that Inner Mounting Flame, that first Mahavishnu that came out in I think 69 or 70, that is real. It's jazzy, but it's very rock. And the drumming on it's really intense. It's double kick. I mean, it's a very intense album. And another band, although they're not jazz per se, but they to me registered with the same amount of intensity as King Crimson, especially early Crimson. So yeah, that and you were talking about some of the jazz with the funk. Well, I like Herbie Hancock. He had a band called the Headhunters.
Yes, sir.
Before he went solo, and I like them. I have one of their CDs, which I thought was really good. And there's also one called Mr. Hands that he did that has a few cuts with Jaco, him and Jaco playing on it. And I didn't know Herbie was ever a jazz pianist because my exposure to him was the Rocket video on MTV.
Get out, yeah. Well, yeah. I guess me too at first, but I guess in the past couple of decades, I've come to know him in a whole new light. I was going to say that it was funny that, it was funny to me that someone who had left the clarinet behind, so to speak, within the interest of pursuing more metal sounds in guitar and bass, it was kind of odd for me to hear that you took a liking to jazz at the age that right about when you were already making the transition to guitar and bass, but you were still kind of digging on some of this jazz stuff,
Oh, yeah. Like I said, when around 16, 17, it started with Holdsworth, and then it just went from there, and then come, to find out years later, a lot of the bands I like, some of the progressive metal bands, whatever, they listen to the same artist.
Yeah.
And some of them traverse the same path, being that they started out, listening to a lot of metal and whatnot, and which I still listen to metal, but I mean, then their taste kind of changed and it went off into jazz or jazz rock or whatever. And there are a lot of musicians that have traversed that same course. And I think what that is because if you're a player, when you start out with metal, unless you're just content with doing the same thing over and over. You want to expand, you want to get better, and when you start listening to music that forces you to think outside the box, you can't help but get better.
Yeah, well, I think jazz didn't try to hide that. That's for sure. The experimental jazz, Miles Davis wanting to do his own thing, improvisational jazz. I was talking to somebody yesterday about it wasn't so much jazzy, but somewhat Chicago Transit Authority.
Oh, Chicago.
They were me too, and they were an experimental brass band. That's how they branded themselves, and that's exciting. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm all for that. I want to see what are they going to come up with next, because you don't know. And it's kind of funny that you were drawn to that, even though you had your eyes looking in another direction at the same time in the metal genre, but the same quality endeared through both in its appeal with you was that they were doing something for the first time. They were doing something different. You know,
yes.
No matter the genre.
Yeah,
it was kind of cool.
It was very new to my ear, and I appreciated it. I was like, whoa. I was like, because wanting to better myself as a guitarist, I'm listening to Alan Holdsworth. I'm like, what the hell is this dude doing? And just trying to figure out what he was doing, trying to figure out what Steve Morse was doing, what John McLaughlin was doing, what Yngwie and Steve Vai were doing, and that all that just really resonated with me.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you did the Grooves and the Grooks. I'm sorry.
The Grooks, yeah.
And that's the first time I realized I was mispronouncing that. By the way, I've already done a drop for y'all on a podcast, and I mispronounced it.
Right.
The Grooks, and now Mimic. And you and I were talking about that a bit earlier. Which also is kind of forging its own path, not kind of, but definitely is forging its own path, not just with typical New Orleans sounds, but I think in general y'all are doing something completely different. So, I mean, that needs to be mentioned. And then they can find some of that music on Bandcamp, also on NewOrleansMusician.com.
NewOrleansMusician.com, NewOrleansMusician.com, and as of today, Reverb Nation.
Cool.
You know, I posted one song on Reverb Nation, but it's the lead off track on the Bandcamp site.
Sure.
So yeah, they can find it there and check it out. And like I said, you know, we're working on newer material. You know,
with who?
Mimic, Apollo and I.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working on newer songs. We're looking at maybe five tunes, and then adding in the first song off the Bandcamp, a song called Within a Nulled Future, which was composed sometime in around December, and maybe doing like a 6-song CD or like a little mini EP. Or
that's what I was going to ask. What's your strategy for release? Because these days it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, we're probably. I was talking to Apollo, like maybe we would do like what they call the waterfall thing, where you release a single, and then maybe 4 or 5 weeks later, boom, here's single number 2, and then boom, here's single number 3, and you do it every so often,
sure,
as to not overwhelm or inundate the listener. Or because I've been doing a lot of research on this, and because of the streaming model, and because of the way music has gone, the things now it's going to be either, you know, singles, or it's going to be EPs. You know, and that's something that Paul and I talked about when we first started the band. You know, it's like the songs that are on the Bandcamp, they're fairly short, not intended to be short. I mean, you know, they're like 2 and 3 minute songs, and this time around, like the newer stuff, like, you know, let's make them a little longer. But what I was telling him was that, you know, nowadays people have really short attention spans.
Absolutely. And
the days of putting 8 to 10 to 12 songs on an album, no. Nobody's gonna get through the first 5. Like, there's a band I will not mention who I was a huge fan of, and their last CD I got, they had like 15 songs in there, and I'm thinking, dude, nobody's gonna make it past song number 4 or song number 5. Like, I couldn't even do it, and it might have been 12 songs, but anyway, it was a lot of songs.
Sure.
But the way it's going now, everything, you know, because of the streaming model, everything is it's going to be singles or it's going to be EPs.
Yeah.
So we're either going to do an EP, or we might do it as a single, and then 4 weeks later, boom, another single, boom, then another single.
Sure.
And just make the announcement, hey, new Mimic single.
Yeah.
You know, because that's pretty much the way it's going now. And we're not streaming. Not yet, anyway, only because the streaming model, it's just it's very unfair to the artist. I mean, I get it. You know, I know bands want to get their stuff out there.
Sure.
Like, hey, you know, we're now on all the streaming platforms, you know, TuneCore, Apple, Spotify. And that's great because a lot of people get to hear it, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, is it really benefiting the artist? And, you know, is the artist making, you know, getting anything out of it? And for the most part, no. And there was even a memorandum or something they were trying to pass. I saw this online. In regards to Spotify and other streaming companies to make the model more fair for the artist and more lucrative.
Oh, really?
You know,
what was it, like a mandatory minimum or something? Like
yeah,
a minimum
like
wage, I guess, so to speak?
Yes, and this was like a year or two ago, and I don't know if it ever went to a vote because it was never resolved, but you can find that online. It was a motion that was filed in court on behalf of, I think, some musicians, you know, whatever, some music company, to make the streaming model much more fair for the artist.
Yeah.
You know, because that's how a lot of people get their music now. They stream. And as a result, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine earlier, a sound engineer. And as a result, a lot of musicians, they've sold their back catalog. One of them notably being Carmine Appice, the dude who, you know, played drums for Ozzy and Bark at the Moon, you know, wrote songs for Rod Stewart. He's a legend. His drummer Vinny played in, you know, for Black Sabbath, for Heaven and Hell, and Mob Rules. Connor Heap sold his entire back catalog for a set amount because he's like, hey, there's really no royalties anymore. Everything's streaming. You know, you don't get anything off that. And I also heard that, I mean, I'm not really a big fan of pop music, but I heard Justin Timberlake did the same thing. He sold his entire back catalog because, you know, nobody's buying really CDs anymore. They're not buying physical copies of music. I'm one of those weird guys though. I want the physical copy. I don't care for streaming. I don't use the streaming services. I want the CD. I want the physical product because I want to see who played on it. I want to see who engineered it.
Yeah, the liner notes.
The liner notes.
Yeah,
I love that. That was one of my things with LPs and cassettes. Like I couldn't wait to see like who did they thank? You know, who did they use, you know,
Sure.
and I'm still like that, you know. And just to real briefly, you know, when Lars Ulrich decided to call Napster out and take him to court, and he got a lot of flack from it, and you know, from people like, oh man, you know, they got popular through tape trade, and you know, to hell with him and what he did. But in retrospect, Lars Ulrich, he was right. He said this is going to deprive musicians, of being able to make a living doing this because you can download everything. We have no way to make money. So now, you know, bands, they've turned to, nowadays, you know, either it's, you know, selling merch or playing live shows. But then again, when COVID hit, COVID really took, you know, a lot of that out of the equation because of it, you had stagehands that couldn't get work. You had bus drivers couldn't work. Techs.
Yeah.
Great, you name
supporting services.
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
And they couldn't work. So as a result, bands couldn't tour. And even then, there's still some residual from that. You have bands, I think, the band Loudness from Japan, those guys, they canceled their U.S. tour because the logistics just weren't there. And some bands, not only them, have to cancel because even after whatever money they've made, once they've paid out whatever help they have, there's very little for them. Some bands will still lose money, but all because so many people are out of work for COVID, and a lot of the help, you know, wasn't available as well. So some bands won't even tour. They're like, no, it's actually going to cost us money to tour.
Yeah,
you know, especially after you've paid out. You know, whoever you've paid out, your agent, you've paid out the venue, or whoever you've paid out, you know, the tour bus company who you're renting your tour bus from.
Yeah,
or, you
not
know,
a lot left.
Yeah, no, there's not, you know, and especially unless you're selling your merch directly, you know, if you're doing it through a company where you have to recoup your funds for the amount of merch sold, you know, that's money you got to pay out of pocket as well from the merch. So for a lot of bands, it's not worth to tour, and they'll just, you know, they'll put out singles or little EPs and say you can get the music here, you know, for X, you know. So it's changed a lot, man, and it's crazy.
I really like. I mean, I go digging for vinyl whenever I can, and I've appreciated being able to do it in different manners. Like sometimes I'll check to see who produced it or what label they're on, and that's going to tell me a bit about the album. And then if I recognize one of the members in the band and I know his music style, then I'm starting to learn. I'm starting to understand more about what it is I have in my hand that I've never seen before. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'll be looking for, whatever, and like CTI or Kudu records, or if Quincy Jones was a producer or something. I know about where they're coming from with these things, and I've always appreciated that. And there's so much more within the folds of inside an album that you can open up and look into. I've always appreciated that. I think a lot was lost on that in streaming. It's not there anymore. And
no, absolutely, especially too when it went to the CD model. There was just a lot when CDs started coming out. It's one thing to look at, like say a Celtic Frost or Possessed album cover or whatever. It's one thing to see the actual vinyl, but then it's another thing to see it on CD. It just kind of lost something a little bit. Believe me, when you've seen some of the album covers I've seen, or back in the 80s, going to, like I said, Warehouse Records or wherever, or the record stores I went to, and just seeing these album covers, there's definitely a difference between that and the CD. I mean, there is, and just something, got lost along the way, and
Definitely
of course it's to be
lost.
expected, but especially between CDs and streaming, to where, like, when the Napster thing first hit, I knew somebody, that's all he did was stream everything and brag, well, I got, like, blah, 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 I saw this, and I'm like, dude, but I'm thinking to myself,
what do you know about it?
There's there's no liner, there's no
Think
nothing.
and you talked about going from albums to CDs. The medium shrunk down to less than a quarter of the size of an album, so that's that much less space that you have for artwork.
Exactly.
And when you think about albums like Santana's Abraxas or Miles Davis' Bitches Brew, these were fold-out albums that then became the size of a small poster with continuing artwork. Never seen before, original artwork.
Right.
Murals. These are gorgeous, pieces of art that you just kind of throw away because you can stream it now. It seems kind of like a little bit soulless to me.
I agree. And, and the same could be said for the ELO albums from the 70s and the Rush albums. Man, you open them up and it's like, whoa, it's like a tapestry. It's like, man, this is phenomenal. This is incredible.
Yeah.
Because I had a friend of mine growing up, he had all the Boston and ELO and Rush and Queen, and I would just sit there as a kid, mesmerized, open them and look like, wow.
Dude, that's where it started for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
Somebody else's collection. They were so inspired by it, and they're like, this is a whole world, really detailed world. This is amazing.
Yeah, and definitely lost in the CD and definitely the streaming age for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did your mom, did she have a record collection, or did a family member? Did you ever have that experience as a kid?
My cousin. My cousin had some of the bands I just mentioned, plus he had the Police, Blondie. My cousin did, and that's where I got exposed to some of that, listening to it on the stereo.
Yeah.
And just looking at those album covers, and especially some of the Queen album covers and the ELO ones with the big UFO in the cover of the Boston, like, wow.
Yeah.
Definitely, like you said, it shrunk down on the CD, and it just loses that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Talk to me about you're doing lessons now. Is it just bass, or do you do guitar lessons now as well?
I can do guitar. I have in the past, but I prefer to mainly stick with bass.
Okay.
And I've been teaching. Well, when I was playing guitar, I was giving guitar lessons. So between guitar and bass, I guess I've been teaching since, I'd say, the early 90s. I've been teaching for close to 3 decades. And I've taught at a couple music schools. I've taught at the Metairie School of Music. I taught at a couple music stores that used to be open at the time, Rock and Roll Music. I taught there. I also have a couple websites I get students through. One which is Taylor Robinson. Another one which is takelessons.com. And they've gotten me students through that. And I've done guitar. And I've taught privately. And but I prefer to stick with bass because I just feel more comfortable on bass. And I just feel I have it more together on bass. Like I said, I still have my chops on the guitar. I can still write, I can still play, but to me, when I pick it up, it kind of feels foreign to me. Whereas the bass, I feel right at home.
Sure. Yeah. Did this get Did this lead to sponsorships, or did the sponsorships come through other means?
No, it led to sponsorships because what I had to do was I wanted to get Bartolini because I've been playing basses with their pickups in them for years. And a friend of mine, ex-coworker, told me about Instagram about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago. I was like, Instagram? What's that? I was like, man, you can put videos up on there and you can blah, blah, blah. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, put some of your videos up on there, you playing bass, and people will check it out. I was like, all right. So I did that, and I was like, well, I wonder if I could get something out of this. So I hit up the Bartolini company, and they would tag. They said, okay, well, first you got to tag us in the videos. We'll look at the videos. We'll see if they're worth it. And so I started tagging them, and then they would email me and say, okay, for your videos, do this, don't do this, do this, do this. Definitely don't do this. So they gave me a list of do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
And the more I adhered to them, it'd come back to, hey, that was good. Now do it better. And then eventually, after so many videos, they took me on as a quote unquote emerging artist, and they sent me the contract, and I signed it. And so I get half off any of their stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. So I get a percentage off of that. I also tried getting with DR Strings, but that didn't really materialize. I'd like to get Ibanez, but that one is really tough because really you have to be a touring musician. You really kind of have to have a name. It's hard to get sponsored with them. You really need to be out there, because I was looking at Ampeg as well, but it's the same thing. You have to be out there touring. You have to have a name for the most part to be able to get endorsement deals like that. But I'm more than happy with Bartolini, and if I could get DR Strings, great.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy with Bartolini. But it was work. It was doing the videos, and and I'll say this right now, any of those videos you may see on my own Instagram channel, not the Mimic Instagram channel, but my own Instagram channel, a lot of that was not one take, man. I had to stop. I had to reshoot. Some of the ones, I make it look easy, but don't think for a second that I nailed a lot of that in one take. I didn't. I'd mess up, like, nope, not good enough. Delete. Go back. Start it over.
Yeah, well, I mean, social media has a way of discarding transparency, I believe.
Yes.
So that's a comfort to let people, or I guess it's an encouragement for other people to know that it took some doing before
it did.
Materialized.
Yeah, because one of the videos I did, probably my most recent one on my own Instagram channel, I did the intro of a song by a band called Liquid Tension Experiment, which was basically a few of the guys from Dream Theater doing a solo thing, all instrumental. And there was this opening, and it's done on the keyboard and the guitar, and it's ridiculously fast. And I learned it and played it on the bass, and people were like, whoa, like that's like insane. But I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I didn't get it. It took quite a bit to get it. It's not one of those. So anybody out there, if they look at my videos and they're like, my God, look how he does. It's like, no, dude, that didn't happen just one time through. It took multiple.
At least you're not like, showing your tits and lighting it on fire and all this other crap. It's raw talent. It's not, it's not publicity stunts. So
yeah, no,
applause for that.
But it's also to show Bartolini, like, hey, look, your boy, is got a fair, a decent amount of chops to him, Because my thing was, too, a lot of bass videos that I see on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, they're good videos, but it's a lot of guys who are they're really not doing anything outside the box. They're doing slapping, they're doing funk bass lines from funk bands, which is cool, or they're doing whatever, and I'm thinking, well, nobody's trying to do, they do have some bass players that'll do sax stuff on bass. I've seen quite a few who are really good at it. But I'm thinking to myself, nobody's trying to do keyboard lines. Nobody's trying to do trumpet lines. So I would just try and do something different. Like, what is something I would do on bass that you wouldn't expect? Like Randy Rhoads. He has a song on the first side of the album called D, which is a little classical thing he wrote for his mom. I did that on bass. I was doing like Bach pieces. I have some music from Bach and Beethoven. I was doing that on bass because nobody was really doing that.
Sure.
They're doing like Flea from the Chili Peppers, or they're doing Jocko, or they're doing Les Claypool. And it's like, well, I really don't see people trying to do Bach, or, trying to do this or do that. So let me just kind of step outside the box on that a little bit and do something different. again, it's just to do just to stand out because
Yeah.
I don't like being a clone. I want to have my own individual personality, be it as myself, as my own person, or the instrument that I play. Well, what I should say is the way I play, because a lot of people play Ibanez basses, but I just want to have my own identity. I want people here and be like, yeah, that's Jorge, or George, whatever, like, yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
I don't want him to be like, oh, that sounds like so-and-so, or that sounds like so-and-so, because then it's like, well, kind of defeats the purpose. But, I get it. I mean, there are some people that, they idolize their favorite player, and they want to sound like that, and, some wind up being clones, and so be it. I'm not going to knock it.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, what it is. But for me, I mean, I love Jocko. I love Geddy Lee. I love Billy Sheehan, Steve Harris, Geezer Butler, Cliff Burton. Love all those guys. But I don't want people to hear my stuff and say, oh, that sounds exactly like so-and-so. I mean, if anything, I want you to hear the influences, but the influences are filtered through my own way of translating said influences into my own style.
Translation, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you how some of those pieces translated onto the bass. How did you feel they came across? So some of them are not going to be a good fit, and some of them are going to be palatable, you know what I'm saying?
I chose the ones I thought made the most melodic sense, and to an extent were a bit easier to do. The ones that would really come across as melodic and stand out was what I was going for. Not so much like what was the hardest thing I could play, although there are a couple pieces that were definitely challenging. But for me, it was more of the melodic aspect, like, something you could hum, something that was catchy.
Sure.
As opposed to just a constant string or run of notes, because eventually that'll bore the listener.
Sure.
So I think whatever I did do, I think it came across well.
Yeah. Did some translate better than others, like Bach, as opposed to a keyboard theory piece? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though those guys wrote on piano, I found that, like, for example, the classical stuff, especially the Bach's, what they call his inventions, which are there are two parts. You have a part that's played in treble clef and a part in bass clef. And so I would what I would do is I would play the treble clef part, which you wouldn't really expect to be done on a bass. And I found that it lent itself a bit better than, say, other pieces did. Like, there were other pieces in there that were maybe a bit more spread out. Whereas with the ones I went for, they were a bit more compact, a little bit more notey, so to speak, but they were melodic, and at the time, Instagram, they only allowed you 1 minute to get your point across. So it's like, okay, what can I do in 1 minute to make the listener be like, oh, that's cool? So I kind of had to go with something that might have been, like I said, I wanted it to be melodic, but at the same time, I also wanted it to be a bit challenging.
Yeah.
And it's like, what can I do in a minute? What can I distill in a minute?
Yeah, it's not easy.
No, not at all. And there was stuff I had to discard because I'd look back at it and it'd go like a minute and 2 seconds and it would cut off. I'd be like, oh, well, man, you can't see the rest of it. So then I'd have to go back and either try and play it faster or just, no, I need to pick another piece that's shorter.
Yeah, sure. Tell everybody where they can find examples of your work.
Okay. As far as me doing the classical bass pieces and stuff like that, there is my Instagram, which is J, then an underscore, then my last name, CAICEDO7. There's that. Then there is the Mimic Instagram, which is Mimic, M-I-M-I-C as it's spelled, 720. And on there I'm playing a few examples of the songs from the Bandcamp, playing certain bass parts. As far as Mimic itself, there is the Bandcamp site, which is mimic and the number 1.bandcamp.com. And then today I just put us on Reverb Nation as Mimic. So if anybody wants to check it out or see, what David's referring to or what the stuff I'm doing, it's on both Instagrams, J_CAICEDO7 and then Mimic 720.
Okay, cool. And the grooves too.
The Grooks.
Grooks.
The Grooks, they have a, I think the group, they have a Reverb Nation. We really haven't done anything since about October, November of last year.
Okay.
Mainly because the other members are involved in different projects. For example, our drummer Don, he's now playing guitar in the Tomb of Nick Cage.
Mm-hmm.
He's a new guitar player, and they got, you know, and congrats to him for that, because they're a really good band and they got quite a bit of a following going. So he's playing in the Tomb of Nick Cage. He's playing in the Dreadfields. And then our singer guitarist, he is playing. He's doing. Speaking of keyboards, he's doing kind of like a very minimalist kind of thing with a Moog. Kind of like, I think he's going for like a Kraftwerk electronic kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
He's been going on under the name the Keyboard Junkie, and he's been doing like little shows, I think at like Siberia or Santos, whatever. So we're all involved with different things. So there's really, if anybody wants to check the groups out, they're on Reverb Nation, definitely, and so, you know, people can check them out there for sure. And yeah, that's about it really, between the Instagrams and the Instagrams, the Bandcamp, and then I have my own personal Facebook, which, you know, people are already posting on that. You can just find. I'm easy to find. So yeah, that's if people want to check anything out, they can go to those aforementioned sites.
Cool. All right, man. I think that's about it.
Thank you, David.
Appreciate it, man.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Damn it, subscribe! They'll like you, but you gotta go.